Alright, cool. So, hi everyone. Hi. So, welcome to Clemenko's class of Misdirection, social engineering to counter surveillance.
Hey everyone, what's up? Okay, so this talk. So this talk is about using social engineering tactics in counter-surveillance situations. So this one, first of all, this one's dedicated to the only part of the government that actually listens, especially to us. Hi guys. And a little bit of background info about me. So I recently graduated from Wilmington University with a bachelor's degree in computer network security. Looking for a job right now. Unfortunately, I had an incident where the feds tried to recruit me and they decided to go completely unethical, so I had to walk away. But in the process, I got some practical experience in this stuff as a result. So first, a warning. This is not to make yourself an OPSEC risk or a danger to yourself or others. Don't fuck it up. Because right now you're in the danger zone. It's only going to go downhill from here. Okay, so as a disclaimer, if they are already trying to get you, this probably won't help you. This is primarily to prevent you from getting to the point where they decide to hunt you down by using social engineering to make the point that you're not someone they really need to be focusing on. This can also help diagnose being spied on if the situation is accurate, if the situation is right as well. So a real world scenario for you, and this is something that actually happened. There was a German scholar who got busted back a couple years ago. He was doing a paper on Marxism, and it was a philosophy paper. So most of the info was lost due to right to be forgotten, so can't exactly pull up citations and stuff because it's all buried now. But he was very private, had good OPSEC, used Tor, OTR, encryption, all that stuff. The German authorities saw what they did of encryption and Marxism, and they assumed he was a terrorist. They kicked his door down. So when using privacy tools, there's a very real possibility that if you have good enough OPSEC and you have certain things leaking out through Google, for example, there's a possibility that this will wind up being something which could get your door kicked down if you're, say, a philosophy major running a paper on Marxism in Germany, or if you're a hacker studying, how to do, say, buffer overflows or something like that, and black market exploit sales and things like that. Unless your name is, of course, Krebs. So, an introduction to our character. Archer is an up-and-coming hacker. Red is interested in a person of interest kind of way, and he's a bit wary of Red. He tends to lean more to the side of Blue instead. Something feels off, and he's getting a weird feeling from people who have been approaching him. Okay, so let me make this absolutely clear right now. This is going to be more Red trying to recruit Archer rather than Red trying to get Archer, but this is going to go into some interesting stuff. So, what's the threat model? Assume they're watching you on all the things. Prism and XKeyscore are not your friends. Unless you're the NSA, in which case maybe. So, don't assume they're hostile because they probably aren't, at least at first. But don't assume they're friendly either. That would just be bad form and frankly stupid. So, there's a saying, just clam up, and in this case, it's not always true. In this case, if information denial were always working, then we wouldn't have things like psychological warfare and information warfare in the military. As Sun Tzu said, all warfare is based on deception. And yes, I know I just did a Sun Tzu quote. No, I don't care. Our objective is not just to deny information, but also to craft a narrative. It can help reduce your risk of being suspected of things you're either not doing and reduce your risk of being suspected of being a threat when you're not. And unfortunately, as we know from experience in seeing all these news stories about people getting their doors kicked down and stuff like that, unfortunately, with the way swatting has shown and all that stuff, if they suspect something is going on, they'll just kick your door down, they'll use extreme force, and ultimately, you're going to lose all your privacy when they kick your door down and seize all your gear. So that's not a good thing. So, deception in the old world, Operation Bodyguard, the lead up to the Normandy invasions of 1944. They were using inflatable tanks, among other things, in order to try and deceive the Germans into thinking that they were landing on a completely different beach. In the process, they managed to get the Germans to think, hey, we're going to go to this other beach because they aren't going to hit Normandy. And as a result, the Germans were about a day behind on the Normandy invasion with most of their forces, giving the Allies a chance to invade the beachhead. Now, just about all propaganda has always been using this technique as well. Ultimately, this is just turning propaganda methods on its head and using them against the intelligence community when they decide to, listen in on you. So, deception in the brave new world. Anyone hear about J-Trig by chance? The GCHQ and various other organizations using social media, among other things, to influence activists and suspected terrorists and all that stuff. Well, it's not just GCHQ, it's the Russians, it's pretty much every country out there. All organizations do it now. Hell, I mean, advertising is a form of information warfare. You're trying to sell your product to the other guy and, ultimately comes down to, hey, how can I go ahead and convince these people to believe what I'm trying to tell them? And as you know, deception, propaganda, mass messaging, all that stuff, it all comes down to controlling the flow of information. And that's what we're trying to do here. So, Archer's story, part 1. So, Archer is encountering some weird people who like to pry, especially politically. And they seem a little too specific, which is unfortunate because when they seem a little too specific, things can get a little bit creepy. Although he doesn't realize it at the time, he's being scouted out by people who work for Red. This can get very interesting. So, part 2, at first he likes what he hears from Red, but then he realizes, how did they know what to talk to him about? Ah, crap. So, OPSEC is great and all, but, even the most meticulous OPSEC occasionally leaks. For example, when you have to Google search something or something like that, yeah, you're connected through Tor, but even then you have to worry about the possibility of relays being messed up or things like that. There's always the possibility you might accidentally not search with Tor, in which case you're screwed. But if you control what you're sending out, it's a little bit harder to profile you. And unfortunately, when confronted with the unknown, people tend to assume the worst. And when they assume the worst, bad things happen. So, example. About 3 months ago, I was reading through the Dooku 2 papers, and I had noticed some interesting network traffic about 4 months prior to that going to Indonesia. Turned out Indonesia was one of the command and control areas for Dooku 2. At this point, I was like, oh shit, did I get Dooku on my system? And until I wound up coming down from that and doing a little bit of diagnostics, I was like, okay, what's the possibility there's actually Dooku on the system? Turns out it wasn't Dooku, but at the same time, even in this field, something acting funny, kill it with fire. Laptop's acting funny, kill it with fire. I mean, really. We all know that once you're all home from DEF CON, you're going to either image the machine and start doing forensics, or you're just going to wipe it and start all over. So, keep calm, nuke it from orbit. And ultimately, well, crap. Okay, ultimately, this is about using targeted information leaks to control the flow of information. The intelligence community knows this as a limited hangout. And the origin of that phrase actually stems from the Nixon administration. When they were trying to deflect suspicion from them, they decided to do what they called a limited hangout, to let some of the information hang out in order to deflect people from the really, really damning information. So using targeted leaks to craft a narrative is always useful. Ultimately, this is all about using propaganda as a counter-surveillance technique. Remember that you're Googling or browsing the internet, you're posting on Facebook, whatever. As Taz said in the previous talk, disinformation is a powerful tool if you know how to do it right. And that's ultimately what this is coming down to. Doesn't have to be deception, but does have to be enough to make you seem like less of a threat. Or you could make yourself like a pufferfish and push people away. For example, if the feds got a little too clingy, you might decide to puff yourself up saying you support WikiLeaks, for example. And then they realize that it's probably a bad idea to continue. So ultimately, it's like using an ECM jammer. And an ECM jammer, for those who don't know, it uses the radio spectrum and it just blasts on every possible radio wave it can in order to try and overpower radars and all that stuff. So what you're doing is you're essentially creating high levels of noise in order to make this actual signal harder to read. Sounds can be damning, as we all know, because if you stay silent, they might take that as an admission of guilt. Unfortunately, this has happened in the past to other people. And crypto itself makes you interesting. We know that the NSA, among other groups, do use crypto as a selector for storing information for longer periods of time. So crypto itself will make you a target. So ultimately, looking mundane in info leaks can make it look like you're less of a threat than you really are, or for that matter, just not a threat at all, because you aren't actually a threat, right? So you could also, unfortunately this got cut off, but you could also flare yourself up and make yourself like a pufferfish in order to deflect suspicion as well, by making yourself less of a target, less of an appetizing target, making them think you're going to speak out if they do something. It makes it harder for them to justify taking the risk. Detecting, ultimately, it can also be used for detecting compromise, and this is where the really good stuff starts happening. So if you suspect you're being watched, and you know they're doing it, and you know who you suspect, you can try and influence behavior. So this is a tool that can help detect if someone is spying on you. Admittedly, you have to have some sort of form of communication with the party involved. However, sometimes that happens, like Human, for example. It can also help detect information leaks. This is known as a barium meal test, and it is used in the intelligence community, actually. It's essentially using fake targeted information leaks to influence the control or influence the behavior of the people you're trying to root out. So, what the fuck is a barium meal test? So, what you're doing is you're revealing fake secret information in order to try and influence the behavior of those on the receiving end of it. If they react, they wind up tipping their hand that they're actually doing something they shouldn't be, or that there was a leak somewhere. Where if they don't react, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But at least you have the knowledge of knowing that you tried. So this was, according to Peter Wright's Spycatcher, this was used by MI5 and other intelligence agencies back during the Cold War. So this is actual espionage shit. This is actual shit they actually do in the real world. So this isn't just theory, this is done in practice. For all my fellow Tom Clancy readers out there, this is known as a canary trap from Patriot games. Although the canary trap was a more simplified version of it in Patriot games. There is a known example where a canary trap or barium meal test backfired on Elon Musk while at Tesla. Apparently he was trying to root out information leaks, and it backfired because he sent one copy to his general counsel, and the general counsel, and he was going to send individual copies of a non-disclosure to everyone else with slightly different wording. And the general counsel just forwarded his to everyone, and everyone got the general counsel's version. So sometimes this does not work as planned, just for the record. So consider the following. Ultimately, this is not about can you influence it once. You have to use the scientific method. Once is chance, twice is coincidence, 3 times something's up. That's a saying there is in fighter pilot school, according to various fighter pilots that have been out there, and frankly, it's a rule to live by. If you see something where you can just say, for example, you're walking down a street, and someone's eyeing your phone. If you change course once, and they keep following you, it's chance. Twice, if you change course and they follow you again, okay, what's going on here? 3 times, okay, something's not right. Try to get to a crowded area, preferably with police nearby, because something might be about to go down. So, ultimately, if you can only incite the reaction once, it's probably nothing. But if you can repeatedly incite the reaction, you might have something going on. And ultimately, this is just using the scientific method. Now, I should note, if you're actually in danger, or if you suspect you're in danger, you might want to cut down the number of times you need to test just to be safe. As we all know, two of the greatest scientists on the planet will always tell you, use the scientific method, and I, as a noob, will tell you, use the fucking scientific method. So, part 3. So, Archer doesn't put much on social media. He's a fairly private person, doesn't post on Facebook, doesn't post on Twitter, any of that. So, all of his accounts are also locked down. Standard InfoSec practice, friends only, you get the idea. So, the question is, how the fuck do they know that much about him? Really, how the hell does that happen? So, in light of the recent oddness, Archer decides to do a barium meal test to try and influence the behavior of those who he suspects are watching him. At this point, it's only a hypothesis. But it's a hypothesis that needs to be tested in order to become a theory. So, at this point, he lets a little information slip. Not a lot, and nothing dangerous, just enough to see if he can influence them and their behavior. And if something happens, so what he does is he starts putting some info on Skype and Facebook and all that stuff. And the reason I'm dropping Skype and Facebook is because we know they're PRISM organizations. Yes, I am citing NSA documents here too. So his contact, who he suspects with Red Berry, starts acting on the information. And if he appears to act on the information that he shouldn't have had access to, there might be a leak somewhere. And ultimately, this is what it's going to be focusing on. So, in order to confirm his hypothesis, Archer observes and sees if he can repeatedly influence Barry's behavior. So, if it was random coincidence, it's not going to be repeatable. However, if he responds in a predictable pattern, something may be up. An emphasis on may, because there's always the possibility it's still chance. But if you want to find an info leak, that's how you find the info leak. So, part 6. In this case, for the sake of this example, Barry does start reacting on the info leak. If he didn't, we could kill it right there. We could just go back to step 1. So, Archer starts narrowing down the suspect list of tools and winds up finding that Skype and Facebook and Twitter appear to be the key tools of choice that are being used against him. He suspects these tools are compromised, and he also decides to wipe his box just to be sure. Nuke it from orbit, it's the only way to be sure. In this case, he decides to have some fun while he's at it. And this is where some more stuff happens. So, crypto won't always save you. They love computer network exploitation. It's well known that the NSA and all the other organizations drop a ton of money on exploits. There are groups like Hacking Team out there that drop a ton of money on exploits and sell to unscrupulous groups, including Sudan, I should mention. Fuck those guys. Who go around selling surveillance tools to everyone. And if something like that gets on your system, it's fucked. You might as well just start over and hope that they didn't infect a hard drive controller like an equation group malware or something, which frankly is highly unlikely given the fact how controlled that specific kind of malware is, but still. It's totally not like that kind of malware source code in the wild, though. So, thanks to these guys, thanks assholes if you're in the room, exploit countermeasures. Surveillance tools will detect the kind of device and software you're running. So, you're going to want to obfuscate what you're running. User agent switchers, fuck yeah. So, user agent switchers are your friends. Why not say if you're on the Linux box that you're running Windows and Internet Explorer? If you're actually running, say, Linux and Firefox. This is something which helps you say, hey, yeah, look at me. Run your Windows exploit on my Linux box. Seriously, try and get shell. And ultimately, obfuscating other software running on your system works as well. For example, if you're running an IIS web server, you might have it set up to say you're running an Apache web server. If you're running an Apache web server, you might want to say you're using Nginx instead. So remember, Fox Acid tools aren't just for the NSA, and they are coming soon to a script kiddie near you. Unfortunately, thanks to Hacking Team, this is now all on GitHub. Thanks, guys. So, part 7. After installing a new OS on his laptop, he starts doing standard hardening and messing with the various configuration files. He does this all from a location such as an internet cafe or for example, a library that he's never connected to the internet from before. The reason is because if they pop your router, if they suspect they hit your box, if they see you going over the internet initially as, say, Linux, you won't have a very easy time of convincing them you're actually Windows. Or if they see you going over the box, or if they see you going over the network as Windows, you're going to have a hard time convincing them you're Linux. So you want to obfuscate a little bit more and send them off a little bit in order to make them think that, you're not who you say you are, so to speak. So in order to throw off attackers, obfuscation measures wind up throwing off analysis tools which wind up being used to attack you. Ultimately, we know stuff like Fox Acid and, frankly, also stuff like the hacking team malware is all automated and all easy to use. And especially with the hacking team leak, thanks guys, again, this is all in the hands of everyone now, and it's all going to wind up being advanced to new levels of crap where everyone has it. It's not going to be long until every 2-bit script kiddie winds up having stuff like the hacking team malware in their arsenal, and that's going to get bad. So, in order to throw off attackers, the obfuscation measures are implemented, and context matters. As we know, even a ton of data doesn't provide context. Snowden himself said that the problem with the NSA programs is that they're adding more and more hay to a stack of hay while they're trying to find an individual needle. And as we all know, that does not work. So what winds up happening is they add more and more data, and they think they're getting a more complete picture of you. But if you're doing things like Googling, for example, random medical conditions, and they assume, for example, that you have Ebola because you're Googling Ebola, for example, just to do something completely random, they might assume that you are, let's just say, sick or something like that. They'll do some assumptions, and that'll end up badly. So controlling the context of the information those who are watching you see can seriously change their opinion of you. And which one of these will put you in the Fed's danger zone? On one hand, we have a bunch of assholes. On the other hand, we have a bunch of real assholes. The question is, which assholes are worse? So, Archer's story, part 7. Archer decides to research blue some more after deciding that red was full of shit. And ultimately, blue is looking more appealing. However, in order to research that stuff, he has to make sure red doesn't think he sympathizes with blue, because red and blue are kind of going at it, because, as always, red doesn't like blue and blue doesn't like red, because apparently primary colors don't like each other. So red winds up, keep watching him. They wind up just making it look like he's researching blue in a way which isn't as though he sympathizes with them, but is in a way which he's actually just like know your enemy kind of stuff instead. So he winds up sending things like, how to join red, while at the same time looking up the blue qualifications and stuff like that. So it ultimately looks like, hey, I'm interested in these guys, but not that kind of interested, when in fact you are that kind of interested. So, for example, just that stuff. So ultimately, part 8, Archer decides to, for the most part, cut ties with red, but what he does next is to be determined, if you know what I mean. Hint, hint. So what it comes down to is give some information to prevent people from assuming the worst. And shut the fuck up doesn't always work. Ultimately, this doesn't replace OPSEC, but it can help augment it. Don't give too much information, because that's just oversharing, and that's always going to get you in trouble. But at the same time, only give enough information to deflect. Yeah, it's almost done. Only give enough information to deflect or pinpoint negative attention, or deflect or pinpoint negative attention, such as people spying on you. This is only a single tool in your toolbox. Questions? Okay. We have how much time? Okay, so we're over. So if anyone has questions, talk to me outside. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that.